In April 2024, Reggie Bush was reinstated by the Heisman Trophy Trust as the official winner of the award in 2005. And that news was received with almost universal positivity, especially by the people who actually watched him play that season, where he accumulated well over 2,000 yards from scrimmage, 18 touchdowns, and was generally the best player on the field at all times in every game he played in. And that was no easy feat on a team that was good as that one was. When the time came to vote for the Heisman in 2005, Bush got 784 first-place votes and nearly 92% of the voting points total, the second highest margin of victory in the history of the award. But if you remember anything else about this story, you know that is not where it ended. In 2010, 5 years after being awarded the Heisman, Reggie Bush made the unprecedented move to return the trophy to the Heisman Trust, amid a lot of speculation that they were about to ask for it back anyway, because both Reggie Bush and USC were in a lot of trouble with the NCAA. It's important to point out here that the kind of gifts that Bush and his family got at that time would still be illegal by the standards of today, but if he had been playing in the NIL era, he probably wouldn't have needed to receive them at all. And because of that perceived injustice, there has been a clamor for Bush to get his trophy back since the NIL decision was made in 2021. There's not much that college football fans will agree on, but the push for Bush is a cause that pretty much everybody has been behind. But for all this talk of the world being right again now that Reggie Bush has his Heisman back, there are still some out there who are not super satisfied with how all this went down, including University of Alabama philosophy professor and friend of the show, Seth Bordner. Seth recently wrote a paper about the Bush case, the first versions of which had to be completely rewritten because they were drafted before the Alston case in 2021. And the actual paper still hasn't technically been published yet because of all the delays that caused. But we're still going to talk about it because Seth's a really smart guy and it's a really interesting paper, but also because his take on all of this was not what I expected it to be.
The first question I want to ask is, why do you hate Reggie Bush?
I have no hard feelings against Reggie Bush. I think he seems like a very nice guy. He's an electric football player. It was great to watch both in college and in the professional league. My official view is Reggie Bush can't have the Heisman returned to him because he didn't win it in the first place, because he didn't play eligibly in the first place.
Now, after all of the positivity that's been going around after Reggie Bush came back into the Heisman fold, that take seems kinda hot, especially for this channel. But the more I read of Seth's argument and the more I compared Reggie Bush's case to other ones like it in recent sports history, the more I realized that it's a lot more complicated than that. Allow me to give you a very quick version of the NCAA's history with amateurism. Football gets put on TV and becomes wildly profitable. Players ask if they can benefit from that profit because, they're the ones creating the value. NCAA says, no. Players ask, why? NCAA says, because you're amateurs. Players ask, who decided that? NCAA says, us. Players say, that doesn't seem very fair. NCAA says, hey, shut up, and then nothing changes for the next 40-ish years. The NCAA had complete control over the amateurism rules, and were pretty ruthless against anyone who ran afoul of them. And that included Reggie Bush. And I have to be careful here because Reggie Bush is currently suing the NCAA for defamation, and I would like to not also be on that list. So to be abundantly clear, from my understanding, he's been disputing the NCAA statement from 2021 that he participated in a pay-for-play scheme, not that he and his family didn't take benefits. But regardless of the circumstances behind how and why those benefits got to Reggie Bush, both he and USC paid for it. Bush's stats and accomplishments were essentially wiped from the NCAA record books, as were USC's title win in 2004 and the entirety of their 2005 season. 2003 was fine though, they got to keep that one. This whole saga ended in 2010, when the NCAA finally finished its investigation into Bush, which resulted in him surrendering the Heisman Trophy, and USC being hit with one of the harshest punishments that the NCAA has ever handed out. And while I think it would be very easy and tempting to look at that and say, well, that was unfair, everything they did would be legal now, I think it kind of misses the point. The NCAA's treatment of its athletes at the time, including Reggie Bush, was absolutely unfair. But that doesn't make what Reggie Bush did any less disqualifying, for a very simple reason.
Then you look outside of college football in particular, and when you set aside questions about amateurism, it's very clear that we have a pretty widespread acknowledgement that when you do things, even in the middle of the game, that contravene the explicit rules that we're happy with, it doesn't count. And this goes not just in the middle of games with things like when in basketball, when you make a basket, but the shot clock went off before the ball was released from your hand. We all saw it go in, but it doesn't count. And in football, there are a lot of plays that get called back, touchdowns and all sorts of things that happen on the field that we all see happen, but they don't count because the rules specify the conditions under which those things are allowed to count.
The first condition of something in sports being allowed to count is being eligible. Take an example like Danny Almonte at the 2001 Little League World Series. Almonte threw a no-hitter and struck out 62 of the 72 hitters he faced in that tournament. But all that went out the window when investigators found out that instead of being 12 or under, as per the rules of the tournament, Almonte was actually closer to 14. And I think we all kind of get why that happens, right? That team from the Bronx registered a player who was well outside the boundaries of what the tournament allowed. So, yeah, sorry, but none of what you did can actually be allowed to count. And while the rules that Reggie Bush and USC broke weren't quite so obvious, they were still rules, and they had reason for being so, even if the logic behind them was a little harder to understand.
There's no competitive justification to require that your athletes remain amateurs. They're not better athletes because they don't take a paycheck. They're not better students because they don't take a paycheck. In fact, they're probably worse at both. But even though there's no competitive reason to impose this rule on college athletes, the fact of the matter is it is imposed upon them, and it does undeniably serve as a kind of filter that screens off some potential competitors.
Even if you disagree with the circumstances that led to the rule, there was a clear reason for the rule being in place at the time in the form that it was in, and Reggie Bush broke it. But what separates Reggie Bush's case from one like Danny Almonte's? They both broke eligibility rules, so why is this considered worse than this?
In those kinds of cases, I think we're all fine with it because we all recognize that there's a certain important competitive relevance of how old you are when it comes to Little League, or, having to manage your time and when it comes to shot clocks, or having to play artfully in a football game without holding in the case of those kinds of penalties. And I think the only real difference between the case of Reggie Bush and the case of these other ones is that we just fail to accept the relevance of the amateurism rules that applied to him at the time.
So this isn't a question about whether or not Reggie Bush broke the rules. It's about whether the rules he broke themselves were actually valid. People will ask that same question on a number of different grounds, but in this case, I think it's most similar to what I call the everyone is doing it defense. It's similar in a way to the PED argument in baseball or cycling. If everyone is doing it and the rules don't or won't explicitly ban it, is that rule still valid? If there were other players from this era who also received benefits, and I think it's perfectly plausible that there would have been, does that rule still matter? I think so. But I also think that acknowledging everything going on around the rule is important when looking at cases of it being broken, and the subsequent reaction to it. To be clear, they didn't have to give Reggie Bush his trophy back. Just like Danny Almonte's team did at the Little League World Series, he broke the rules as they were understood by everyone in college football at the time. So why did they give it back to him? This section of the video begins exactly where you might expect it to, at Yankee Stadium in July 1983. This is the famous Pine Tar game, wherein Hall of Famer George Brett spiked a go-ahead home run for the Royals, only to have the run ruled out because Yankees manager Billy Martin pointed out that he had too much pine tar in his bat. And then, George Brett calmly and tactfully explained to the umpires why he disagreed with their decision. That case is even more frustrating because that rule wasn't even in place as a competitive measure. It was created so the league could save money. Too many balls were being scuffed and thrown out because they had pine tar on them, so the league limited the amount of pine tar that a player could put on their bat. And in the aftermath of this very public incident, the league realized that that was probably worth another look.
It had nothing to do with making the batters, hit the balls further. If anything, pine tar would do the opposite. And so the American League commissioners said, although the umpiring crew technically, enforced the rules correctly, the rules were wrong.
This was a case where a major sports league realized that they had goofed, and in a rare moment of transparency and humility, they actually did something about it. I'm not saying that's the right move 100% of the time. There was another very famous case in 2015 where Duke got screwed out of a win over Miami by some pretty terrible refereeing, and the NCAA just suspended the crew in charge of the game. What both of these cases show is the desire for major sports leagues to right wrongs, or at least right them when enough public pressure gets put on them to do so. What makes Reggie Bush's case different to those other ones is that we can't go back and play all those games from 2005 again, with or without him. What are we going to do? Call up all those marketing consultants and personal trainers and finance bros to come back and give it another shot against that 2005 USC team? Of course not. Although there is a part of me that would like to see that happen. Really, the only recourse that the NCAA and the Heisman Trust had to correct this perceived injustice was to return the most tangible marker of Reggie Bush's success. In spirit, at least, this was less like the George Brett and Duke Miami cases, and more like Major League Baseball choosing to count Negro League statistics against everybody else's. But there's a problem with that too. What wrong was the NCAA actually trying to right, and how is the Heisman Trophy from 2005 connected to it? The Heisman is an award based on competition on the field, but as we've already established, the rules that Reggie Bush and USC broke weren't really competition related. As Seth pointed out to me, they seem to have done the most NCAA thing ever and fundamentally misunderstood what the problem actually was. If the NCAA really wanted to try to make things right from their end, they would do something like paying reparations to all the players whose likenesses they used before 2021, which looks like it might actually happen, but only because, and stop me if you've heard this before, somebody sued them. In the meantime, though, we've got to return to the thing that caused all this ruckus in the first place, and have a real conversation about why symbols like trophies usually wind up in the middle of these discussions. As a general rule, I have found that sports fans tend to measure success on a spectrum. At one extreme, we have people who believe in that old Vince Lombardi quote about winning not being everything, but being the only thing. Even though he wasn't really the person who said that, and he actually meant something different when he said the thing he did say, but that's beside the point. These are the win-at-all-cost people, but on the other end, we have the people who are just happy to be there, and we tend to believe that there actually isn't that much in between those two things. We also have a tendency to believe in a sports version of the just world hypothesis, that if a team or player wins something, it's because they deserved it, and that victory indicates something very special about them. And because of that, I think we all wanted Reggie Bush to get his Heisman back, not because he didn't break the rules, but because any other outcome would have been incredibly and wholly dissatisfying. All the stats and the eye test confirm that he was, beyond the shadow of a doubt, the best player in college football that season, and short of him injecting steroids directly into his body in full view of the entire American public, I can't think of too many good reasons for him not to get the award that's supposed to represent that. But here's another question for you. If you knew that someone had done all the requisite stuff to win a trophy, independent of some non-sporting thing that you had no control over, then why does it matter if you get confirmation of that?
If you knew that had some non-sporting fact been different, that you would have been credited with the victory, that you would have in fact earn it. What else is missing, I guess, is the question.
All of this is not to say that I don't think awards like the Heisman matter. They do, but their meaning comes from us. And by their nature, only one person per year can win them. There have been plenty of players over the years who, had it not been for another player receiving slightly more favor from the somewhat arbitrary group of people evaluating them, would have won those awards with relative ease. Do they not matter because they didn't win a trophy? To quote Seth from a different part of that interview, I think that one of the main things Reggie Bush's case teaches us is that we need to come up with more ways for athletes and teams to, quote, count themselves as being excellent, without necessarily having a trophy to represent it.
We ought to be able to sort of like acknowledge that bragging rights are a thing that you can earn even if you didn't get on TV, even if they haven't written your name in a record book somewhere, even if there isn't a trophy hanging in some hallway somewhere. I don't have a problem with Reggie Bush. I don't blame him for anything. I don't think he's a bad person. I don't think he's a bad football player. I think he got involved in a bad system, and I'm not sure he had many better options. We get too involved in this notion of moralizing people's competitive, choices and strategic decisions. And I think we should stop doing that just as much as we should start embracing excellence that isn't, quote unquote, officially recognized.
Reggie Bush has a Heisman Trophy back in his possession now, but I don't think that makes him or his performance as a player any better or worse than he was a few months ago. He was breathtaking at USC, genuinely one of the most exciting athletes and entertainers that I've ever seen, and in my opinion, there's no trophy on earth that could represent that adequately. Has some great injustice been set right by him getting that award back? Maybe in some people's minds, but personally, I think there's a lot more work left to be done to get to that future. In any case, the official record now shows that Reggie Bush was the best player in college football in 2005, and quite possibly one of the best of all time. And if nothing else, that's a win for everybody. Hello to all my fellow students out there. My name is Will, and this is my channel, Student of the Game, where we make video essays about sports psychology and culture. This is one of the hardest videos to try and tease out a meaning from, because there's so many perspectives on it, and so many people who feel so strongly about a particular side of the argument. But I did my best to just tell you guys what happened, and then also bring in someone who's thought about it in much greater depth than I have to help work through it. If you enjoyed our analysis, please do give the video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stuff like it. There's a new project that I'm working on that I'm really excited about, and I'm hoping to announce relatively soon, so keep your eyes and ears open for that. But until next time, I'm Will. Bye.